Good morning. It's Wednesday morning. That means it's Garland, Nixon, and Scott Ritter, and we got plenty to talk about today. Let's talk. Good morning, all. Garland and Scott here. Just a reminder, this is my Wednesday morning show for my subscribers on Rockfin. I believe that everyone who's on YouTube, if you're challenging the system at all, if you're trying to do accurate reporting on international affairs, there is a danger that you're going to lose your channel or get some strikes or get censored in some way. You should have a backup. Rumble's great. Rockfin's great. Odyssey, there's plenty of them out there. I choose Rockfin, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. And you can join it for free, see all my stuff. You can become a subscriber if you can afford it. And if you choose, a subscriber costs $14.99 per month. If you join up for a year, they knock off a couple months. It's like $12.40 a month for subscribers. So every week I do a subscriber only one show for the subscribers. Everything else that I have, everything that I put up is available on Rockfin, but I do want to give my subscribers one show. I start off with 15 or 20 minutes here, and then we go fully to subscribers only on Rockfin. So thank you very much if you can afford it. Let's get started with Scott Ritter. Here's an article, Scott, that I think is of great consequence. And here we go. It's reported all over the place on Yahoo. Transfer of F-16s to Ukraine to be considered nuclear threat, says Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. And during the hostilities, our military won't check whether each specific aircraft of the specified type is equipped for the delivery of nuclear weapons or not. It's the very fact of the appearance of such systems in the armed forces of Ukraine will be considered by us as a threat from the West in the nuclear sphere. They also went on to say that he also goes on to say that Russia has very specific and public policies regarding the use of nuclear weapons. But the fact of the matter is, we do know that the U.S. stores a number of nuclear bombs that are, some of them are just your basic dumb bombs that can be put on an F-16 very, very easily. So it also seems to me that wisely also, I might add, that the U.S. has somewhat backed off and started saying, well, maybe perhaps these F-16s wouldn't be as valuable as possible. Wise move. Your thoughts on all of that, Scott Ritter?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the F-16s in question and why Russia might take this stance, because void of context, it might seem that Russia is trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. The most likely source of F-16s early on, if the green light would be given, would be from the Netherlands. There's, I think, 24 F-16s that the Netherlands had said they're willing to make available for Ukraine once they've ended their operational service. That means that once the warranty expires. Basically, these are older versions, but the Netherlands is one of the 5 nations that participates in the nuclear sharing arrangement between the United States and NATO. And on Dutch soil, there is a U.S. nuclear weapons storage facility where there's B-61 bombs that you mentioned, the air-delivered munition. And the Dutch F-16s have been configured to carry the B-61 bomb and actively train in this process. Every year there's a big NATO exercise, and they go through the motions. They bring out a dummy bomb, a full-scale mock-up, and they practice the procedures of turning that into a weapon and getting that on an aircraft, and the aircraft taking off, and all the command and control procedures are practiced with those airframes. And so from the Russian perspective, they're saying, look, if the Netherlands are going to take 24 nuclear capable aircraft and send them to Ukraine, we don't have a mechanism to inspect these aircraft and say, have they been, de-weaponized? Because there are things that have to modifications that have to take place to make them capable of delivering nuclear weapons, certain avionics and other things. You can't just strap. I mean, you could, but from a safety perspective, an operational perspective, and command and control perspective, you can't just strap a B-61 bomb on any aircraft. The aircraft have to be configured to receive them. There's safety protocols. There's stuff that happens to make this possible. So, from the Russian perspective, they're saying, well, we weren't part of the decommissioning process of these aircraft. We haven't seen that all these modifications have been removed, and we haven't inspected the aircraft upon receipt in Ukraine to make sure that they're not nuclear capable aircraft. Therefore, we will treat every single one of these airplanes as a nuclear capable aircraft and act accordingly. So if they're deployed to Ukraine, they take off and they're heading towards Russian space, we're going to just assume there's nuclear weapons on board, and we have no choice. They're not bluffing. This is as real as it gets. And I think the message was received, because suddenly you don't have the United States running away, but you have Mark Miley, I believe, saying, look, the Russians have 4 to 5 times as many generation 4 to 5 aircraft than the Ukrainians do. And in order for us to match that, we'd have to provide hundreds of F-16s, and the timelines associated with it and all this kind of stuff. It's just unrealistic to talk about it at this time. So they've sort of taken the F-16. They're saying, it doesn't make any sense to give Ukraine a small number of F-16s because it's not going to have an impact. So we're taking the F-16s off the table for the time being. But the reason they're doing that, because they've never hesitated sending insufficient numbers of equipment before. I mean, case in point, the British, 14 Challenger tanks. Talk about a meaningless number. But they did it anyways because it was a political statement. And so one could imagine that it would be a political statement to send 24 F-16s to Ukraine.
We lost Scott. That's okay, because it happens every now and then, and when it does, he's usually back on in a couple of minutes. Sometimes his system drops out, so don't worry about it. We're gonna keep going. So I will continue to talk about that a bit until we get Scott back, and that is that one thing that is very, very obvious: the Ukraine, when the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, there were 2 things that happened, I think, that triggered it. And one of them was relative to this subject. One of them was that, of course, the Ukrainian military increased their attacks on, increased their attacks on the Donbass. And the other thing that happened was, the other thing that triggered this was Zelensky started running around saying, I want nukes. He started saying, bring me nukes, give me nukes. And when he said that, the Russians said, this thing is got to be brought to a screeching halt. So the fact that one of the significant factors that triggered this was that Zelensky started saying, we should have nukes. Recently, Zelensky, in his interview with the Washington Post, said, there are people that are afraid of a nuclear exchange. My people don't care about that. The guys out here dying don't care about that. We're getting killed. So we know that the Ukrainians are so reckless that anything they got, they would use. If they could get their hands on nukes, they'd throw them at Russia just as quick as they could. They've asked for them. So this is not an isolated discussion. You know what I mean? This has been a continuum of the Ukrainians saying we want nukes, Zelensky saying I could care less about it in nuclear war. Whatever we get, we're throwing it at the Russians. And now the Americans and the NATO saying, perhaps we should give them some actual aircraft that could potentially carry nuclear weapons. When you look at it through that context, it's obvious that the Russians see this legitimately as a nuclear threat to their homeland. And of course, it then triggers their very clearly written and public policy, Scott.
There's no doubt about it. Look, I mean, I'll be frank here. There's no way the United States will ever allow an F-16 configured for the delivery of nuclear weapons to operate on Ukrainian soil. Just isn't going to happen, especially if Ukraine's not a NATO member. It's sensitive technology, and why why would you send that to Ukraine knowing the airplane's going to be shot down and the Russians are going to acquire it? So, I mean, the Russians have a strong political statement that they're making here right now. But from a practical standpoint, there's just no chance um, ever that NATO or the United States is going to give Ukraine not only the means to deliver a nuclear weapon, but an actual nuclear weapon. So it's a non-starter to begin with. But Russia has a right to say. I mean, the Russians they're very frustrating to work with sometimes. I have to tell you that as a weapons inspector, um, I especially as things got contentious in Iraq near the end, um, you know I knew that what we were doing is the right thing. I knew that the Iraqis were operating in violation of the resolution and all that kind of stuff. And I was very aggressive and I very much wanted to get in there and continue this work. And the Russians were always, well, yes, but page 34, paragraph C says that you must first double knot your shoes. And that if you have failed to double knot your shoes, you cannot proceed with the inspection as originally configured by the United Nations. I'm like, I didn't double knot my shoes. Well, therefore, your inspection's not legitimate. Yeah. I mean, the Russians are just that way. They're just, they read everything. Words matter to them. Mind is and oftentimes they do it to be deliberately disruptive. They use process to slow things down. They use the details to confuse the issue. They're geniuses at this. And what they're doing here is the same thing. There's no one in Russia that believes that those F-16 can carry nuclear weapons and drop them on Russia. There's not a single. There might be a fanatic in the military. It's like the Americans could do that. They could do that. I'm a conspiracy theorist. But every professional's like, no, that's just not how it works, guys. But the Russians are like, we don't care what reality is here. We're going to go with the letter of the law. We're going to start talking about the fact that you, NATO, have designated these as nuclear delivery aircraft. If we ever have a discussion with NATO about how to dispose of the nuclear sharing arrangement, these aircraft will be counted as nuclear weapons delivery systems. They are an accountable item. So there's 24 there, and you're going to give them to Ukraine. What are the decommissioning procedures? They're going to pull out the treaty, and they're going to say, in the past, when we have decommissioned B-52 bombers from nuclear capable to this, following procedures took place. We had inspections to take place, and we had ongoing inspections to verify continued compliance. Where's that procedure for the F-16s? And if these procedures don't exist, we must assume the F-16 continues to be a nuclear delivery vehicle. And they're 100% correct. 100% correct. And so that's what the Russians have done here. And they have the United States and NATO in a bind. And so I think that's why the practical decision was made to remove it, because we don't want to get into that discussion, especially at a time when we're trying to get the Russians back to the nuclear negotiating table. Right now, there's no talk going on about New START, and one of the critical parts of, damn, I don't know, did I just...
No, you're still here. You're good. You just froze for a second.
My computer just keeps flashing out on me. I was like, I apologize for the language, but it just happened to me earlier. I'm like, what happened? Did I lose it again? But I got to stop moving my hands. Maybe I'm scaring the computer. But, but the point is, we're in the middle of negotiations, or trying to get the Russians back to the table, where one of the outstanding points in the New START treaty is B-52 decommissioning procedures. And, we are trying to make the case that, we have rules that we've stuck to and all that stuff. And the Russians aren't buying it, because basically what we've done with the B-52s is it's supposed to be decommissioned, which means it'll never be able to deliver nuclear weapons again. Now, the best way to make that happen is to cut it up into little pieces. But what we did is said, no, we'd like to use it for a conventional delivery thing. So that little black box that's up here that makes it a nuclear capable thing, and that wire that comes down here, we cut the wire, we remove the box, we tape off the wire. And the Russians went, yeah, but all you have to do is put the box back on, connect the wire with some electrical tape and it's back to being a nuclear system. We're like, yeah, but the treaty doesn't say how we do it. It says we must do it and there must be procedures to do it. These are our procedures. The Russians are like, you negotiate in bad faith. And we do. We're liars. Because we then went to Congress and bragged. They're like, yeah, but if the treaty goes south, overnight we can bring back our number of delivery systems. Because remember, treaties about delivery systems. Warheads go into storage, into reserve. They don't get counted when they're in reserve. And so the warheads are in reserve. They're not counted as part of the 1,550, which are based on delivery systems. Now, if we can suddenly make 50 B-52s come back because we attach the boxes and we bring the warheads out, we can now take our 1,550 nuclear warheads and turn it into 2,500 overnight. And we bragged about it in Congress. And the Russians are listening going, guys, that's not what disarmament's about. It's not about playing games. It's not about being cute. It's about real disarmament. You guys are sitting here making a mockery of it. And so that's a contentious issue. And the last thing we need to do to muddy that water even further is to play games with nuclear capable Dutch F-16. So I think that's one reason why they just said, too complicated, too many spin-off ramifications. Let's just terminate this thing in the bud.
I also think this, China has to be looking right at what we're doing. And if China suspects that we would do something that drastic in Taiwan, I'll put it like this. I'm the president of China and I start thinking, holy crap, they're going to put nukes in Ukraine. I'm thinking to myself, eventually they're going to put them in China. I got to move now. I would, if I were, I mean, I'm just saying, and I'm a peaceful guy, but if I look on my border, I'm looking at everything you do in Ukraine and I'm thinking you're going to play the same game here. And as soon as I start thinking that, I think I'm not waiting around for you to put nukes in Taiwan. I'm going in and I'm going to attack. That's what I would do. Which brings me to this very important story. Let me find it. Henry Kissinger is, and I think this is really important. Let's look at this. Something's going on, Scott. Something's going on.
It's not me, man.
Henry Kissinger makes surprise visit to China. He's met, and now it says, and here's what he says: the United States and China should eliminate misunderstandings, coexist peacefully, and avoid confrontation, Kissinger said at a meeting. Now, this is according to the Chinese ministry, right? History and practice have constantly proved that neither side of the United States or China can afford to take the other party as an opponent. If there's a war between the two countries, it will not bring any meaningful results to the two people. Here's why that is important. The Biden administration is not saying, don't go, don't go. They're not, you don't, and here's the other thing. You don't see mainstream media screaming, what is he doing there? He's an idiot. We hate China. He's getting in the way. You don't see any of the normal people that you would think that would push back and call him a China lover or a Russian bot. He's not going there, in my opinion, as Henry Kissinger. He's representing a bloc. He's representing something. I think it's very interesting. All this going on with Yellen going there, with even though they're still putting missiles around China and all this kind of stuff, Kissinger showing up in China. I think that's a big deal. Your thoughts on what that means, Scott?
Look, Henry Kissinger, I mean, he's a complicated man. There's people who have very strong opinions about him one way or the other. And so I'm just encouraging anybody who's about to hear what I'm about to say not to get too emotional about this. Like him or not, he is one of the most consequential figures in American foreign policy history, in the history of the United States. When it's all said and done, Henry Kissinger will be right up there as one of the most influential practitioners of American foreign policy and American national security policy.
Scott, was he in charge when Nixon went to China?
He did it. He's the guy that made Nixon in China possible. He's the guy.
I think that is relative to what we're talking. Okay, go ahead.
Well, this is why he's in China right now. Kissinger made it. It was Kissinger's secret visit to China that set in motion Nixon going to China. But Kissinger also did secret missions with Brezhnev to set up Nixon going to Moscow. A lot of people forgot that Nixon actually went to Moscow in 1975, right. Signed the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Sort of a big deal at the time. Kissinger has done a lot of things. People focus on he's a war criminal. He did the secret war against Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. And that's part of the history. It's there. And, Henry Kissinger's legacy will in many ways be defined by that. But he's also a man that is a master at international diplomacy and realpolitik. His approach to problem solving is real. He's a man of great influence. Great influence. Again, people, when I say influence, that doesn't mean that I support what he's doing. Right. I'm just speaking that when Henry Kissinger speaks, when Henry Kissinger writes, people listen, people read. It has an impact. And the other thing people need to understand is you don't operate at the level that Henry Kissinger operated and then suddenly be irrelevant. There is connectivity between Kissinger associates and Kissinger himself and every single American presidential administration that has gone forward since the Ford administration, which was the last administration that Kissinger served in. So when Kissinger writes something or speaks something, it has been staffed, shall we say. Meaning that Henry Kissinger's job is not to throw a curveball at the establishment because Kissinger is the establishment. Kissinger is a very major part of the establishment. And so this trip was done. I can guarantee you 100% that there is a very senior person in the State Department who was the point of contact of Henry Kissinger's trip, that every aspect of this trip was run through that person, that Kissinger, while he may not have briefed Blinken in person or Jake Sullivan in person because of the optics of it, it's hard to move a 100-year-old man around without being seen. Kissinger had people go meet with them. They exchanged ideas, and this is a well-staffed visit with well-staffed objectives, and these objectives coincide with American policy. Kissinger, you see, can go to China and not have to go through the Tony Blinken, tap dance. You saw what Tony Blinken did. He had to tap his way down the stairs and meet with the low-level guy. Hey, how you doing? I'm Tony Blinken, and you are? I'm the third assistant janitor of the fifth assistant secretary of the fourth cousin of John Smith. Oh, thank you. It's glad to meet you. When do I get to meet the next guy? Well, tomorrow you'll get to meet the second assistant secretary of the third goat liquor of this, that. And then eventually you get 30 minutes with Xi Jinping, who makes fun of you, mocks you, and then refuses to appear next to you in a conference. That had Tony Blinken did. Janet Yellen came in and she had to do the nod and bob and all that. Kissinger goes in, he's a rock star. Okay, the Chinese view Henry Kissinger as a rock star. This is history. I mean, the guy's 100 years old, but he is the living manifestation of history. And he's showing up and he's sitting down with them and they are taking him seriously. There's no games being played right now with Henry Kissinger. They're having honest, open discussions, and it's a safe discussion with the Chinese because it's not official, meaning it's between China and a private citizen, but it's official because it's going to go back to the State Department and they're going to read everything that came out of this. This is a big, big deal. This is part of the China reset that's taking place in the Biden administration, a recognition that the policy direction that they had been on is fundamentally flawed, and they're trying to move into the stop the slimy talk. Hey, dude, if you don't like Kissinger, that's your business, but be gone. I should turn off the comment section because that distracts me.
Yeah, it happened. But because this is real politics, let me show you something that I think is of consequence here. Look at that. This is Global Times, right? Which I follow Global Times. I consider it almost like kind of the voice of the Chinese government in a way, right? And here's what's important. It's the dog that didn't bark. Kissinger's there. Not one article. His name is not mentioned. Nothing about Henry Kissinger. Kissinger, Global Times covers everything. When they're pissed at Biden, there's an article that says Biden is a jerk. When they're happy with something the US did, it's right there. Well, that's a good move in the right direction. Everything that happens, I would recommend people go to the Global Times because that's to me the pulse of the Chinese leadership, right? What do you make of the fact that, and I go there every day. I just knew there would be Kissinger stuff there. That's the big story. They referred to him when he came there as literally an old friend. And he is old, and I guess he's their friend, right? But nothing on the Global Times site. I find that interesting.
Well, here's why. When Tony Blinken, if you go back to your archives, and Tony Blinken showed up, did they write stuff about Blinken's visit?
Yeah, they
Of
did.
course. And every word Blinken said had to run through a filter of Chinese politics. Because the relations between the United States and China are at such a bad level that every word gets run through the ringer before it appears before the Chinese public. That's just the way it is. And it complicates things because, right now tensions are so high. The idea is to de-escalate. There's a lot of gamesmanship that has to be done. There's a conversations taking place between Kissinger and Chinese officials right now. Conversations that need to be pure, void of politicized spin, etc. This is part of that open channel of communications that has to occur. And it's important that this effort not be disrupted by politicized press. And that's why I think you're seeing absolutely nothing, because the goal right now isn't to spin Kissinger to the Chinese public. He's not an official. It's an unofficial visit. If they do talk about it, he'll be an old friend, as you said. The goal right now is to get a pure, clear message communicated to Kissinger so that he can take it back to Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. can act on it without having to deal with politicized spin. Because what happens now, you might laugh about this, but gosh, it could happen. What if Henry Kissinger said something like, it's imperative that we get back on the one China policy and that we, move in this direction, that we bring back the purity of the original agreements, da 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 da. And then that becomes a headline in the Global Times. And then the Chinese foreign ministry now has to talk about it because it's in the headlines. And they say something, and Xi Jinping weighs in. And then Joe Biden's at a fundraiser goes, Xi Jinping's a dictator. I don't care what Xi Jinping. And suddenly the whole damn thing went away because Joe Biden's an idiot. Or Jake Sullivan in a moment of weakness says something stupid. Although I'm not a big fan of Jake Sullivan, he is a professional communication spin artist. So he's pretty good about not saying stupid things. But my point is, you don't want to create an opportunity for this effort to be undermined by the, indiscreet comment or leak or something. So I think the best way to prevent that from happening is to nip it in the bud and just don't create something that can build into something that has to be commented upon, has to be, weighed in on. And then you have a panel in the United States, as Sunday morning talk shows are wont to do. People, why is Kissinger in China? Well, he said this. Who said that? Who's that? And then Blinken has to show up. Tony Blinken, what are you going to say about Kissinger? And next thing you know, it undermines the whole effort. This is an effort to get Kissinger to create the foundation of a dialogue that could hopefully get the United States and China on the track of diplomacy that leads away from potential military conflict. So whatever anybody thinks about Henry Kissinger, and I respect everybody's opinion, respect the process. You can hate the man, but respect the process, because if you allow your petty, and I will say this, your petty problems with Kissinger to interfere with something that could prevent a war with China, then you're the problem, not Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, you just hit something that made me that rang a bell, and that is they had to go around Biden. You know, the last time they it seems like they get this plan together, they go and they're like, okay, we're talking to the Russians, and then Biden, oh, Xi Jinping's a dictator, and they're all, "Oh, for God's sake," you know, and then the Chinese hit the ceiling or what have you. It seems to me they had to go around him. They had to do something. I get the feeling that Biden's not involved here, that he's not much of a part of that. He may be briefed. I get the feeling, you know, we often talk about this, who's really running things, who are the real powers. You look at Biden and his cognitive decline, shall we say, and you think to yourself, I don't think this guy's running the show, right? Is it possible that the people that are running the show have looked at this thing and said, man, the Chinese are now saying, if you guys don't back off, we're going to go to war here. And they're looking at the results economically. You know, let's face it, these rich people making a lot of money, and Bill Gates and these guys are getting filthy rich in China. And they're talking to the military people saying, man, we're 7,000 miles from home. We're almost, if we go to China's border, we're already almost out of ammo. If we go to war with China, it ain't going to be a pretty sight. Nothing. Our economy is going to be wiped out, and there's likelihood that we ain't going to fare real well in military. Do you think there's things they're starting to put these things together and acting in a more prudent manner, shall we say, Scott?
Well, they've already put it together. I mean, what do you think prompted Blinken crawling on his knees to China? Because that's what it was. It was the United States Secretary of State crawling on his knees to China. Why? And the answer is that there's an Air Force Lieutenant General, last name Hinote, Hinote, a man who since 2018 or so has been running the war games in the Pentagon that are used to prepare the military for conflict. And he's been focused on China. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk. You see these articles written in different outlets, you know, there was a war game at the Naval War College, and America fought to a draw. Another one, you know, Rand Corporation has done a 5-day war game, and America wins. You know, America has finally won a war game, and all this stuff. And then you have American military commanders, you know, talking tough as military commanders do. You know, the naval commander: if we go to war against China, the United States Navy will make its presence known. We will execute the orders given to us by the commander in chief, and we will prevail. And then you have Air Force guy running around saying, and all my boys and girls are going to pull out pistols and shoot them at targets and put 7 bullets in the head of the target in preparation for war with China. Not forgetting the fact that they fly transport aircraft. That's irrelevant. They're all talking tough, flexing muscles, etc. Hinote's job, though, is to push all that aside and just deal with the reality. And earlier this year, he issued a report to the Pentagon that was taken to the White House. And the report said bluntly, we can't win. There's nothing that can be done for us to win. We haven't won a real war game since 2018. The Chinese capabilities are just far outstripping anything we have. We are weakened by Ukraine, and we can't recover. We can't win. So any policy that leads us into the direction of a potential military conflict is preordained to fail. We will lose. And that's just the blunt assessment. We're going to lose. And Mark Miley and the chairman and the general, the chiefs of staff looked at it and went, yep, Mr. President, we have to fundamentally change our approach to China. Because right now we've taken a very aggressive posture based on the assumption that American military power will be enough to keep the Chinese at bay. But we can no longer count on that because we will lose. We will lose a fight, any fight we have with the Chinese except the nuclear fight, and we don't want to do the nuclear fight. And so after Hinote's briefing, you saw it was amazing. It was literally like you went to bed one morning going, oh, America's very aggressive against China. You woke up next morning going, wow, we're not that aggressive against China anymore. Suddenly things changed, and Blinken went to Beijing, did his 30 hours of meetings to get the 30-minute meeting to create the conditions for a resumption of dialogue. And you see the United States backing away from conflict with China. It's because we can't win. That's what happened. Is Lieutenant General Hinote's report was absorbed by the Pentagon, briefed to the White House, and the conclusion is we simply can't win a fight with China right now. And so we are adjusting our policies accordingly. And that's why Janet Yellen went over, because you notice what we did. We stopped talking about, muscle, and we started talking about the economy, the wallet. And Yellen went over and listened to what she said. She was very aggressive. She took the opposite tack from Blinken. Blinken's job was to diplomatically walk away from the potential of a military conflict. Yellen's job was to say, we still compete with you in the global market, and we want to work with you. We want to work with your team, but we have these concerns and all that stuff. So there was not any retreat from Yellen. She was there to say, yeah, we'd like to be good with you with Blinken, but we have these concerns. And then you see her go to India and back it up. You have the United States talking about de-risking. And it's interesting, de-risking. What is it? It's a concept. For instance, Garland, if your bank woke up one day and looked at you and said, Garland Nixon is a risk to us for whatever reason. De-risking means we're getting rid of Garland Nixon as a customer. It's not anything, but it's canceling Garland Nixon, de-risking. That's the way it was used. But now what happened is Ursula von der Leyen gave a speech back in, I think, March, and she used de-risking as to epitomize the European approach to China. We're going to de-risk our economy, which means that supply lines, over-reliance upon Chinese supply lines, puts it at risk. So to de-risk, we have to diversify. But the Chinese went and said, so basically you're trying to decouple. Oh, no, we're trying to, because they can't decouple. They can't speak of decoupling, de-risking. But then the Chinese premier came to Germany and went, tell me about this de-risking thing that you want to do. And the German government's like, well, yes, we believe in it. And the German factory owners are like, shut up, guys. We can't de-risk, because the only way we make money, Mercedes, Volkswagen, we only make money one way, and that's in China. That's the only operation we have right now that turns a profit. If you de-risk China and we pull out of China, we go away, because we don't make money anywhere else, and we're not going to for a very long time. If you want us to build up, to de-risk by building up here, there, and everywhere, we have to double down in China. There's the irony. To de-risk, we have to double down. And suddenly you hear Europe stop talking about de-risking, because especially the Germans are like, we're just going to shut up because we have nothing. We got nothing to play. Yellen comes over and goes de-risking. She's talking about that. But China's like, you mean decoupling? She's like, no, it's de-risking. Then she goes to India, and there's a new term out there too. And it is friend sharing. I think it is something like friend sharing. It's a new term come out. And what that is we now are going to friend share. And so we de-risk from China because they're not in the friend sharing business, and we friend share with India. That means that we have like beliefs and values, and we're going to invest in you and you invest in us, and we'll develop these wonderful supply chains that make everything work except for the Chinese, because we've de-risked. But don't worry, China, we're not decoupling, we're friend sharing. And the Indians are like, so what's involved in friend sharing? We're interested in hearing about this. Well, you have to think like us. Well, what's involved in thinking like you? You have to sanction Russia. We're not going to do that. But we're friend sharing. And the Indians are like, no, we're not. We're not friend sharing. And Yellen's coming out of her Chinese and India trip, realizing that de-risking means decoupling, and we can't decouple, because in order to decouple, just like the Germans, remember they had that quandary about, in order to get out, you have to, and in order to de-risk from China, we have to friend share with India, and India ain't in the friend sharing business because they don't buy into our value. Anyways, that's all that. I mean, it's just hilarious sometimes.
Yeah, it just sounds like on every from the economic perspective, our allies are saying we can't go along with you or we'll starve. That's not an option. From a military perspective, our military personnel are saying, well, the way they'd probably look at it is, if you wanted to engage with China militarily, you waited too long. Their industrial capacity, if you think of the number of missiles and things that they could, manufacturer. What we were talking about last night, 200 ships a year or something. The numbers
crazy number of ships. No, you're right. Look, the time to hit China. I mean, again, gosh, I got to be careful what I say, because I'll come off as a warmonger, and that's the last thing I am. But if I were the commandant on the Marine Corps, I think when the Chinese first started dredging the shoals off the coast of the Philippines to make these artificial islands, I would have said, "Hey, Okinawa, how you guys doing up there? Yeah, give me the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. Call up Camp Pendleton. Give me the 15th. Let's get the 32nd in. Guys, take the islands." Well, the Chinese would kill them all. Any Chinaman that resists dies. Take the islands. Take the Chinese flag, burn it, throw it on the ground, and let the Chinese know that you're not allowed to operate this territory. End of story. And then I turn to the Chinese and say, if you want to have a problem, we're going to take the 82nd Airborne, we're going to put it in Taipei. And then we're going to bring in the 1st Marine Division, land at Taipei, and then we're going to bring in a couple Army things. And you want to hook and jab, let's hook and jab. Because that's the game we play right now, because we're stronger than you. But we didn't do that. You want to know why? Because we were too busy playing in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Another thing,
there's
another thing too, Scott. You know what that is? At the time where China was weak enough that the United States could have dominated it militarily, the U.S. was too busy closing our damn factories and moving everything to China, because the people that owned everything woke up one day and said, we can fire these Americans making $50 an hour building X of such and such with all these benefits, and go get Chinese people and pay them next to nothing. So at the time, we're so busy moving everything, deindustrializing ourselves and moving to China so the people in charge could make a profit. The last thing on their mind was a military engagement with China. And then they woke up one day and they can't. I'm glad to say.
I'm glad they did militarily engage. Yeah. But there was a window of opportunity where we had the ability to beat China in a stand-up fight. That doesn't happen anymore. It's gone. And not only that, we have a more complicated economic relationship because, as you rightly pointed out, we did that short-term thinking, deindustrialize, send everything over to China to turn a profit at the expense of the American worker and all this kind of stuff. And now China's saying, well, thank you for helping us become the industrial powerhouse, but it's not going to work the way where we solely focus on giving you what you want. We've developed these supply links with the rest of the world, and this great industrial engine that you've helped us build. Thank you again. We've pulled, again, a lot of people. How big is America? 320 million people nowadays, 340, depending on how many illegal immigrants we have in at any point in time that are uncounted. I'm just being facetious here, but we have that many people. How many of them are in the middle class? It's a shrinking number.
Fewer and
fewer. Okay, China, in the course of the past 20 years, on 3 occasions, has passed a 5-year economic plan, the goal of which is to raise 300 million people out of poverty into the middle class. They did it the first time around, boom. Next time, 300 million more, boom. Next time, 300 million more. That's 900 million middle class. They're in the process of doing it one more time. That'll be 1.2 billion middle class. The middle class is, as we all acknowledge in America, the engine of the economy. It's consuming and producing because they have the industrialized. And so you have this Chinese economic engine that's now engaged on a global level. It's out there importing, it's receiving products from the rest of the world, shipping products to the rest of the world, and the importance
and building.
Diminishing,
It's building building. It's creating its own market in Africa. You talk to people that go to Africa, they're building all of this stuff in Africa, which then creates jobs, etc. And then those people buy the Chinese goods. So they're building a market. Now, let me ask you this. I think
they're doing that in Eurasia too, just so you know that they talk about the Eurasian Economic Union. The stands, everybody make fun of the stands, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, or Turkmenistan, and everybody's like, the stands are making fun of the stands. The stands are like, hey, we're people too, and our people want the same thing that everybody else wants. There happens to be a whole bunch of us, and when you look at us as a totality, we are an important economic player, and the Eurasian aspect of it too. So you have China dominating in 2 major growth areas from Africa and Eurasia, and guess what?
Latin America.
They're moving in and taking.
How about the Middle East and Saudi Arabia? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So China's sort of like saying the world is our oyster, and good luck, America.
Let me ask you this, Scott. The U.S., this irony here, this great, paradoxical effect of the Ukraine conflict. The U.S. plan, the neocon plan was we're going to engage with through a proxy with Russia and weaken Russia. And then, of course, they'll fall apart. Putin will fall. We'll put in Navalny, whoever the hell, we'll take out every. Okay. And then once we've weakened and Russia and absorbed or whatever Russia, taken that apart, then we go after China. It wasn't Russia that got weakened. Russia seems stronger than ever.
Yeah.
How? I would imagine that if you're doing a war game with China in 2019, and then you do a war game with China today, where you're running out of every damn thing, where our allies are all saying, we don't want no parts. We don't like this war. We want out. We can't get involved with another, with all the things that have happened. How much has the Ukrainian conflict weakened the U.S. military potential?
Well, first of all, we have to understand, before you speak about weakening, we have to speak honestly about what U.S. military potential was before the conflict. And it's something that I've been pointing out for a long time now. When the Gulf War, when the Cold War ended, we were the unmatched superpower. Literally, no one could touch us. We had the best military in the world. We had spent decades equipping it with the best equipment. We are all volunteer force. Many of these guys joined for patriotic reasons. There's always people who join for economic reasons, but many of them joined because they believed in America, the Ronald Reagan years, rally behind the flag, etc. So we had a well-motivated, well-led, well-equipped, well-trained military of sufficient size where nobody could touch us. We were built around the concept of power projection. We had, pre-positioned stockpiles on ships that we could move anywhere in the world, fly in troops, and we'd have an instant combat capability right there. Then the Cold War ended, and we let it go away. We went, no, we're not going to pay for this anymore because threats aren't there anymore. We're, working with China to give them all our industrial capacity. Russia, we're basically trying to steal all of their economic capacity. There's no need for this to spend this kind of money. And it deteriorated. It didn't go away completely, but the decade of the 1990s saw a restructuring and a shrinking of American military capacity. So much so that when we went into Iraq in 2003, we still had a very capable military. But, the first Gulf War we fought was 750,000 troops. We went into Iraq with 110,000. Now, we upped that number later on. But my point is scope and scale. One of the reasons why we had to go with a smaller number is we lost the ability to generate that level of force. We lost the ability to sustain that level of force. We went in with a smaller force. And then Afghanistan, Iraq, the nature of the conflict changed, where we weren't doing large-scale battles anymore. We were doing low-intensity conflict. And to sustain the force rotations of supporting troops in Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time, we stopped doing conventional large-scale combined arms operations because that's very expensive. The units involved need tanks, mobile artillery. They need a lot of ammunition, a lot of fuel, a lot of training, and we couldn't walk and shoot gun at the same time. So not only did we change the structure of our force and the focus of the force, we changed everything about the support network because, it's the combat commands that dictate the needs of the service. So Central Command, Central Command is responsible for the Middle East and all that. If they have to prepare for the potential of intervening against an Iraqi army coming down, the fourth largest army in the world, the military units back in the United States are training for that. And the whole system is geared to that. But now when Central Command says, no, we're not doing that anymore, what we're doing is we're rotating in brigade-sized units to carry out low-intensity conflict. We'd like you to keep the tanks home, keep the artillery home, convert everybody into light infantry, focus on convoy security and security operations in an urban environment. And so now all the training changes. We're not going to the National Training Center to fight against 100 enemy armored vehicles. We're going to the National Training Center to go into a village and practice, hearts and minds operations. How do we interact with the civilian population? How do we secure an area and do searches? Completely different training focus. And then the equipment is different. We're no longer talking about upgrading the M1 tank or the Bradley. We're talking about getting better optics for the rifle, getting better load-bearing equipment, getting a better uniform, getting a better boot, getting mine clearing, the billions of dollars that was spent in IED countering, improvised explosive devices and all this stuff. And we did it for 20 years. And the reason why 20 years is important is that's a generational change, meaning that the legacy knowledge that existed about the how to really fight a war is gone. Look, I came in the military in 1979. In the 1980s, I was a master practitioner of the art of combined arms warfare. I'm of the age now, I just turned 62. I'm of the age right now where the military is saying, "До свидания, mama, go home, retire, you're done." That's it. The tail end of that legacy knowledge is gone. Everybody that's come forward after that doesn't know how to do that, especially people who've come in after 9/11, who, by the way, if you came in 9/11, you have 22 years in the military right now. Most of them are retired. They're gone. You have people that come in even after that. We have people that don't even know about the heavy fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have people coming in who have never seen combat now, and they've been in the military for 10 to 15 years. And all they know is low intensity combat preparation. And so the reason why I bring that up is General Cavoli, who's the commander of U.S. Allied forces in Europe and All-American forces, he spoke at a forum in Sweden in January, and he said something that was very revealing. He said that NATO hadn't imagined the scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine today. And what that means is because imagination is important, because that's how you prepare in wartime, in peacetime. In peacetime, it's about somebody imagining what a future conflict would look like and then building the force structure necessary to meet the threat and then creating the logistical sustainability for that structure. How much ammunition you need is a very important factor in that. You need a certain ammunition set to accomplish the objective. The NATO ammunition set was insufficient to the task because NATO was conceptualizing a conflict that was based upon the Gulf War, 1991, where throughout the entire Gulf War, the United States fired 60,000 artillery rounds. And that seemed like a lot at the time, except today, what we're looking at in the Ukraine conflict, there are days when Russia fires 60,000 rounds in one day. The Ukrainians are firing between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of ammunition in one day. But America's defense industrial base has been geared up for 20 years to support wartime contingency of 60,000 rounds for the entire war, which means we're swapping out outdated munitions, updating. We have a training supply, and we have limited operational plan. We were producing 75,000 rounds a year going into this conflict. Now, since then, we've been told that the U.S. has recognized the errors of its ways and that we are upping our capability. We now produce 85,000 rounds a year. The Ukrainians, again, are firing, let's just call it 7,000 rounds a day. I'm just a simple Marine there, Garland, but if you're firing 7,000 rounds a day and the people who are your principal suppliers are producing 85,000 rounds a year, in 11 days, I'm out of ammo. I've just ate through the whole thing. There's nothing left. And let's say for instance, I'm wrong. Let's say it's 85,000 rounds a month. It doesn't matter. In 11 days, they've run through that. It's gone, and we haven't prepared for it. And that's the reality. So today, our forces cannot fight this fight. They aren't configured to fight this fight. They haven't trained to fight this fight. To fight the fight that's going on right now, we brag. I mean, you just heard General Miley come out. We've trained 17 brigades of Ukrainian forces, to NATO standards to participate in this counteroffensive. Who trained them, General? NATO trainers? When was the last time NATO ran a 17 brigade exercise? Never. Not in recent history. When was the last time NATO did a division-side passage of lines? Never. When was the last time NATO did a multi-brigade exercise seeking to breach a heavily defended line using minefield clearance tactics. Never. You have people training the Ukrainians who have never done what they're training. They haven't even practiced it themselves. I mean, it's not only that they haven't done it operationally, they haven't practiced it because that's not the fight they've been doing. Up until 2021, our number one goal was Afghanistan and defeating ISIS in Iraq. That's it. We weren't preparing to fight the big fight. And so we have a military right now that simply can't do the job. And NATO can't do the job either. There's not a single military formation in NATO that's capable of doing this kind of job. Even the Turks, with the largest land army in Europe for NATO, when they go into Syria, they're strained. They have to handpick their units and bring those units in, and they have limited capabilities because the Turkish military, for all of its wonderful, they don't. Training is expensive. That's what people need to understand. It's very expensive to take a whole bunch of guys out of the barracks, move them to the field, and then have them participate in realistic training operations, which means live fire. You're firing live rounds, and you have to fire them in quantities sufficient enough to get the muscle memory down. When I went out in 29 Palms as a Marine, we would go out in the field for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and we'd be shooting every single day. My battalion fired more artillery rounds in training in 1 year than the United States Marine Corps today uses in the entire year. Just one battalion of Marines back then fires more than the Marine Corps uses now. So that's the thing. We haven't conceived the fight that we're getting ready to fight, and that's why we're in the situation we're in today. I think there's a growing recognition right now, and we talked earlier about. I think we talked about the 3,000 reservists that are being brought in. We talked about that last night. I think they're being brought in to bring up the 5th Corps headquarters to be a combat capable headquarters, and to bring the armored division headquarters up to speed too, up staffing wise. But still, just because you got a headquarters, you don't have the ammunition. We're never going to get the ammunition. We can't build the ammunition. We haven't geared our defense industry. Russia, on the other hand, interesting article came out. They went back and they took a look at the problems the Russian defense industry is having in the last decade prior to this conflict. And some of these major companies that produce tanks and produce artillery were going bankrupt because the Russian defense the defense ministry couldn't generate orders sufficient in quantity to justify the continuation of the plant. So they were going bankrupt. Many of them were in disuse because there's no orders, etc. Guess what's happened, Garland? They're all up and running today. Every single one of them are up and running. They're working, 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. They're cranking out the most modern equipment in the world. They're pumping everything out. The Russians will never run out of ammunition, never run out of tanks, never run out of aircraft, never run out of anything they need. Meanwhile, in the United States, we're still trying to figure out how to get to the next level of artillery production, but we can't because our defense industry isn't in the business of servicing the American soldier, sailor, airman, Marine. They're not in the business of defending the American public. Now, they wrap themselves in the flag. Go on Lockheed Martin's website, go on Raytheon's website, and you'll see the flag all over the place. You'll see glowing things, but they serve one thing and one thing only, and that's their board of directors and their shareholders. It's all about share value. It's all about getting the dividend. It's about profit. And they aren't going to do anything in the interest of America that doesn't generate a profit. If it's not profitable for them, they're not going to do it. And one of the problems of the way we've done this now is we've built in so much assumption about cost overrun. This is one of the dirty secrets of the military right now. The way a company makes profit is to underbid a contract, both in terms of cost and time. So you put together a timeline, it's briefed to Congress, we're going to build the best bottle of Diet Coke in the world. And it's going to take us 5 years, and we're going to have to invest $1.2 billion up front, $3 billion in the mid, close it up with $1 billion. Then we'll get the best bottle of Diet Coke. And Congress goes, good, here's the money. And then about the third year point, the military is going to say, but we want a bottle of Diet Coke with a cap that can go on and off in the same direction. We don't know why we want it, but that's what we want. They said, well, that's going to require a complete redesign of the bottle. How much is that going to cost? Well, it's going to cost you another $5 billion, and it's going to take 4 more years. Congress, we need to do this because we need a cap that goes both ways. Congress says, do it. Boom, they've done that. Then they do it again. Then they say, well, the threading has to be off. And well, we miss. Next thing you know, this thing's gone on for 15 years, 6 times the budget. And at the end of the day, all we get is a bottle of Diet Coke that does the same thing. It does it worse than the original bottle of Coke that was designed to produce. That's the F-35 fighter in a nutshell. That's every weapon that we produce in a nutshell. Meanwhile, the Russians are saying, we need a tank that can get hit 19 times by Javelin missiles, AT-4s, and main gun rounds. What do we got? We got the T-90. How long will it take you to produce it? 6 weeks. They're done. And next thing you know, you got a T-90 that's running at the Ukrainian defenses, and it's getting hit 19 times. 19 times. I counted on the video. 19 times it got hit, and that tank's still running. Now, I don't know what was happening to the boys inside that tank, because I would imagine they got blood coming out of their ears. But 19 times it got hit, and it's still running. There's a lot to be said about Russian technology.
Well, and here's the other thing that we're finding out. It's one thing to take troops to Afghanistan or Iraq. If you're going to the border of a superpower, you're going to Russia's border to fight, you better be ready, because Russia's prepared to defend their border. Their tanks are designed to operate in the environmental area that they live. They know, well, we got to have wider tracks because we get mud this time of year. Well, the temperatures get here, we got to blah, blah, blah. Now, we got MRAPs that are designed for Afghanistan, for people who put a bomb together with, in a garage somewhere, some, IED. We're designed to defend that. Everything they got is designed for when the weather changes, we find out, hey, our tanks won't operate in that mud, but the Russians will. They're designed. So everything on their border is designed for their border. Everything's designed for that fight. And we got to go to their border. And that just doesn't work. At any rate, Scott, I see our time's just about up. I got to run. You got to run. We got things to do. I want to thank you. Don't forget, everybody, go to scottritterextra.com. That's scottritterextra.com to keep up with everything that Scott's doing. He's got a fantastic video series that he's doing. What's the name of that series again, Scott?
Agent Zelensky.
Agent Zelensky. I like that. So check out Agent Zelensky at scottritterextra.com, and make sure that you share it on all your social media platforms. You can go there. You can also sign up to help keep Scott going. We all got to eat. Scott does fantastic work. So you can go to scottritterextra.com and make sure that you sign up so that you can continue to financially support Scott's good work. Thanks a lot, everybody. Everyone, make sure you share this on all of your social media platforms. Send it to all your friends. Thanks a lot, everybody. We are out.